active engagement of artists and creative agents in schools in changing the way that we learn and teach is crucial. Everybody passes through education. Everybody has those years from 5 through to 16. And if they have an experience of creativity being central in those years, then it will influence the rest of their lives and help us remake our society. The vision of Lead Creative Schools is to change the whole culture of learning and teaching in our schools. It's as big as that. And it's our conviction that you do that by focusing on creativity and critical thinking. I'll tell you a story. In December, the pilot program for creativity and critical thinking in the OECD came to Wales, and we hosted them. And I was at a session with them, and they said quite simply, people from Israel, from Michigan, from Berkeley in California, all kinds of educational experts, and from OECD headquarters in Paris, which is where PISA is centered and all that assessment regime. They said, this is cutting edge. This is leading the way. What happened is that in setting up the project, we agreed with the two departments in government, with the Education Department and the Culture Division. We agreed that there would be auditable outcomes. So we said, you will see literacy, numeracy, digital competence performance go up in the groups that we engage with. Now, that was a bit of a hostage to fortune, and the early evaluations are showing that it's richly delivered. But actually, it's based on a vision, and the vision is this, that there's not a binary world of drills on literacy and numeracy over here, and then critical thinking and creativity over here. Creativity and critical thinking are the route to improving literacy and numeracy. You've got to focus on skills. You've got to have a bit of drilling here and there. But the way people become engaged, the way people come alive, and the way their brains start to kick in and open up, and the pathways open up, is through creativity and critical thinking. And the whole approach of the curriculum that Donaldson has developed and caused to happen, curriculum qualified for life in Wales, is precisely about that. It's that by being creatively and critically engaged, we will be better learners in every way.
And what do you think of school generally?
Doing this in school is fun. School generally is not boring, but it's not as fun as I thought it was when I was little. School generally is just in between.
School generally is what?
In between.
In between.
Fun and boring.
But this project?
This project was one of the best things that I've done in my life.
The thing that struck me in looking at Welsh education was the extent to which it was still very much rooted in that young people have to acquire certain amounts of learning within a certain period of time, and we measure it, and then we give them a recognition in relation to that. And we need to go beyond that. And what was interesting in conducting the review was the extent to which those that I engaged with in the course of the review were anxious, were struggling to do more than the current expectations embedded in the national curriculum allowed them to do, and the accountability systems allowed them to do. And quite a lot of the things that I saw, and there was lots and lots of good stuff happening in schools across Wales that I saw at first hand, but a lot of that was happening despite of and not because of the context within which schools were working. So I saw the challenge for the review was to try to create a context that made that creativity and good practice the norm rather than the exception.
I wanted to do like an aircraft carrier in the scope of a submarine.
And what was the experience like of making it?
Fun.
Did you learn anything?
Yeah.
What did you learn?
Like, more times you do stuff like this, you can get, it means you can be better at drawing and stuff and get more friends.
It was exciting to watch because, I mean, this group of pupils that were involved in the project this year are our disengaged learners. So we chatted as a staff, you know, who would we want to come from our classrooms to try and be involved in the project, try and encourage and get them more engaged. So to see them standing, you know, so proudly and excited about their work and being able to speak confidently, you know, some more than others, but being able to stand there and talk about what they've done is quite an achievement in itself for some of those individuals.
So what do you think was the change for them?
I mean, the whole creative approach, obviously being out of the normal environment, you know, not working in exercise books and things like that. You know, I think the ability to be creative and to go with their interests and do what they want to do and, you know, not worry about getting it wrong or making mistakes and working on their interests, really. Them coming up with the initial idea, what they wanted to do.
There's a great aspiration for things here to change in Wales. And primarily, I think we've had some experience now of what I would term the entrepreneurial mindset, this sort of creativity, innovation-driven approach. And if you look at things like the World Economic Forum, they're making it quite clear that good problem solvers are needed, and that whereas people who perhaps recollect strong facts and work in that way, those jobs are diminishing. I mean, we all know you can pick up a phone these days and find a Google search or something like this. So the whole approach to education has to look at this flexible, adaptable, how can we shift, how can we adjust, how can we change, how can we move the education system to match the aspirations of future employers who are going to need creative people.
I like how I kind of like did the lines on it. I learned that you could actually design it, and you could actually get the angle of it. You can get the angle.
Are you proud of it?
Yeah, I'm very proud.
So much in school is quite regimented in terms of, you know, and a lot of the art, I guess, in schools can be a little bit prescriptive. So it was very much a kind of case of there's no rules really. You know, there was a few sort of things obviously, but generally speaking it was like a sort of freedom to do something that didn't have so many restrictions really. And with the painting as well, that meant that, you know, they could use whatever colours they wanted, they, you know, and paint it thickly or thinly or, you know, however felt right for them, kind of thing, and just experiment. A lot of them hadn't really painted before and certainly hadn't painted with acrylic paint.
It's me at a beach. It reminds me of all the times when I go to the beach with my dad.
And what's this writing around it?
So like when I look at that picture, I see like me on the beach.
So this is you seeing.
They came in very nervous as to what the project was going to be about, and some of them there was no eye contact with people and didn't really want to come in the room. But as the weeks went on, there was two mornings a week that we were doing. Their confidence grew enormously, so that they're all rushing in. They're coming in at different days when we weren't there, hoping to sort of carry on. And to do things this big, you know, when they wouldn't, you know, some of them were told, oh, there's no way they're going to paint, but actually they produced the most amazing work, and you know, so that for their confidence, it's an amazing thing to happen.
And when you look at it hanging there, what are you going to think?
That I finally have done something more than playing on my computer. And I developed a new skill.
Oh, it's amazing. I'm so proud of them all. Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah, they've worked so hard and they've been so engaged in what they were doing. And the group of children we picked were children who are disengaged from their education. You know, they don't engage in class, they really struggle, they have got quite negative views about being in school, and they've just flourished. You know, you could see that every session they just got more and more involved, and they have just loved the project, and they're so proud of their work. You know, they were wanting to go and get their class teachers and bring them to come and have a look at their work. They want to take their work to take back to class and show everybody in their class, and they were able to speak about their work to, you know, to everybody, and it was just amazing. You know, children that wouldn't have put their hand up in class were wanting to stand in front of their class and talk about what they'd done and how they'd done it. Just brilliant.
So I chose a devil gap because I wanted it to be unusual. So I put a cat into a devil and I made it so it can fly. It was kind of fun because the way we made it onto some piece of paper, onto some wood, was actually quite exciting.
Why was it exciting?
Because it was quite fun to do some skills and test my technique. I changed my personality into loving art because I used to kind of didn't enjoy it, so it kind of brought me into loving art.
Well, that's a big change, isn't it?
I'd be delighted if we produced more artists. That would be excellent. So I'm going to be, consciously subversive in saying that. That's a good idea. More artists we need. We certainly need more arts participation in society. So whether they become professional artists or not, we want more people to be creatively active throughout their lives, because this is central to their well-being. And we've got an act in Wales on the well-being of future generations. And well-being is at the centre of our social policy. So let's encourage people to be creatively active, whether they become professional artists or not.
There's a term that Guy Claxton uses, relaxed cognition. And this is when you will recognise it if I say that you are sitting down having a moment and a conversation when a problem suddenly resolves itself in your mind. And it's not something you can predict when that's going to happen. What you can say is that it's down to, as you said, feeling good about yourself, and being able to value what you're thinking. So if you look at perhaps more traditional schooling, what are you looking at? You're looking at what the textbook's value is. Perhaps you're looking at national curriculum standards. As a learner, you don't really contribute much there. If you're doing more innovative, creative things, and you learn to develop a strategy to deal with change, I strongly suspect from what I've read, I can't say I've experienced this, but I'm going on academic literature here, but it seems to help. There's some great work done by a lady called Teresa Amabila, and she actually makes this very clear that the emotional constructs that are associated with creativity are very intrinsically rewarding, and that they help the whole sense of well-being that we're looking for here in Wales. When you're being creative and innovative, you have to be able to adjust and shift. So your neurology, your brain connectivity becomes more important than the rote type of memory. And we understand how brain cells grow now. We understand how they are almost reborn frequently because they're a natural thing. They die and they grow. And how they reach out and connect to other brain cells is actually the challenge of creativity. So when you experience and are rewarded for thinking creatively, there's a guy called John Kunos in the United States now who's actually mapped this using various brain scanning techniques. And I often say it's a little bit like looking at a plant that's been watered or one that's not. And the watered one is the creative one.
So creativity in the classroom is about watering the plant.
Yeah, watering the plant is a great way of looking at this. And again, if you've been creative and innovative in the classroom, normally it's the arts. Normally it's those sort of subjects that have the experience of this, how to nurture this creativity, how to give this level of independence of thought. So whereas academically speaking, as 10 years ago Sir Ken Robinson had in his story about the arts, and how they were at the very bottom of the tree, performing arts, especially, he said there. Now we know that a lot of what these specialists in these areas do can feed into more general forms of education. So in many ways the arts are spearheading the way that education is changing.
Okay. By definition, those of us who have been successful in terms of the existing school system are good at passing examinations. And many people will be much more than that. But the much more than that is often happenstance in a whole variety of different ways. And I think what we need to do is to try to ensure that we're providing the sort of depth in terms of learning that provides the foundation for future learning and for a future life. So it's not simply a race to get to the top of the ladder as fast as possible, irrespective of whether the foundations are strong, but it's also got the breadth of and richness of experience which kindles a desire to learn and not simply an instrumental view. You learn in order to satisfy somebody else, but you develop that intrinsic satisfaction from learning, which is the true hallmark of somebody who's educated.
If you think about that disenchanted child, that child who currently goes into an education system and doesn't see the point of it, actually many of our entrepreneurs make that claim. And I can honestly say to you that I was asked to leave school, probably because I was a troublesome individual. Ask any professor, they were all troublesome individuals. And you have to be able to challenge. So in 5 years' time, I can't say I don't know this will be in place, but I'd certainly see the harnessing of that kind of energy. And the single word I always use is relevance. If you can see the point of your education, and you see how it's going to help you, maybe help other people, create value not just for yourself, but for other people, it's a very powerful thing. We see it a lot in the arts, the communities that we work within. So creating value, if you look at the work of Martin Lackis in Sweden, for example, he's done a lot of work on this, and the emotions we talked about before. So you come in and you can see a point to what you're doing. And if we can hammer that one and get that relevance side sorted, then we would have made a massive change in the education system.
The pace of change, the nature of change in the environment within which schools operate and the wider world means that the previous paradigms of educational change are unlikely to be sufficiently responsive to ensure that we stay relevant to that world. So typically the way in which educational change has taken place has been that pressures build up over time, and then we have a major review or piece of work, and changes take place as a result of it, and then things settle down for a while, pressures build up again, and then we do something else. So you get a kind of stop-start, a process of educational reform. And I think that's never been a particularly good way of going about educational reform. But where there's greater predictability, in terms of the kind of world that young people are going to inhabit or assume predictability, then you can operate in that kind of way. But where you're talking about the nature of change, both economically and socially, being of a different order than has taken place previously, we need to have a school system and a teaching profession which is not being driven to change, but which is driving change. And that's what a self-improving system means, that actually the teachers themselves are not waiting to be made to change, but they're engaging directly with the process of making things better. And therefore, critically, as part of this whole reform process, we need to be helping to have a teaching profession which is able to reinvent itself maybe many times in the course of a teacher's career. Again, the young teachers that I was talking to recently will still be teaching in the second half of the century. Now, we can't even begin to imagine what the learning and teaching process is going to look like in the second half of this century. So we need teachers who are not reluctantly being forced to change, but teachers who are themselves engaging with the dynamic of a changing world and a changing learning and teaching environment. That's what I mean by self-improving system. It's a system that's taking responsibility rather than being driven.
Teachers are individuals, but it's quite a rigorous training, and it's certainly a rigorous curriculum that you're trying to fulfill. And so the individual creativity of a person, I think, becomes less and less. Whereas I suspect many teachers become teachers for that reason. Because they want to share knowledge, they want to impart knowledge, they have an innate creativity. But there are very few places to use it, particularly if you don't have a training. If you're, I was talking about people having an innate creativity. Perhaps, if you're a music teacher or if you have another skill, then maybe that's something that you can use in your teaching. But if you don't, doesn't feel like there's a lot of room. There's maybe quite a lot of creativity goes into creating a lesson, but whether there's any creativity left in the lesson itself is more dubious.
So what needs to change?
Teachers need to play and they need to have time to do that. There needs to be some space somewhere in the curriculum where you can go and experiment, and the pressure's off, and the realization that certainly within this process we've been given an idea of what creativity is. Maybe that's still open to discussion, but it's a good working model to begin with, and the focus that isn't on outcomes. It is on the process. It is on, for instance, collaborating, whether that's practitioners, teachers, children, teachers, whatever way that's working.
It's so funny, people talk about this as if it's a fad, as if it's a change, but you just need to simply look around you. And we were smiling this morning, my wife was a bank manager and introduced the first cash machine. And within 2 years, I think about 80% of her staff had to find new ways of employment because the cashiers weren't there. And that was about 20 odd years ago. The pace of change now is really speeding up. So if you just look at a phone and you look at what a phone can do and the way you can use a phone, the pace of change is absolutely phenomenal. When you think an Apple iPhone didn't exist about 8 years ago, if education is taking someone, shall we say, through as a teacher, you may be given a pupil for 4 years. Just think of the change that can happen simply in that 4 years. Or in a university environment, doing a 3-year undergrad degree, maybe staying on doing a master's, maybe even staying on for another 3 years and doing a PhD. That's that 8 years. To just cast your mind back to what wasn't around 8 years ago, and you suddenly realise what a vast, complex environment we're moving into. So teachers who perhaps in the past would know their subject extremely well, which would still be the case, in something that maybe history or something of that ilk, or maybe some of the sciences, certain things simply won't shift. But in terms of being able to adapt and change and to bring new ideas into play, I think is very, very important. So one of the predicted biggest growth areas is robots who can teach. So the factual stuff, the stuff that we know, you could go online and have your independent robot who's looking at your learning and actually adjusting to your learning. There's a business already out there doing that and developing that. So you as the teacher, what do you offer? Well, previously there's the term the sage on the stage. You are the font of all knowledge. Now you're more the guide on the side, because you're working with the latest knowledge that you can acquire, helping your pupils with that, but being aware that there may be gaps in what you know. And even the pupils can bring things into play, possibly technology-led is an obvious one, that you hadn't considered. So your role as a teacher is going to change. I really have no doubt about that at all.
The days where teachers qualify and thinking that that's it, they know everything, are gone. And the need for continuous professional development so that teachers are constantly evolving as teachers and professionals is very, very important, and to move move teachers forward as much as we're moving the children forward.
The thing that I said to teacher unions when I launched the report was, if I were sitting where you are, I would grab this with both hands. Because this has the potential to create a much greater job satisfaction for your members than is the case at the moment. And I think at whatever stage in career that you're at, that you need to recognise this is not just another initiative, another attempt to make you do things that are different from what you're currently doing. This provides an opportunity for the job of teaching to be more creative and interesting than it's been over the course of the last 20 odd years, and that the obligation is on those who have a responsibility for creating the framework within which you work. The obligation on them is to try to ensure that you're provided with the support that means that you shouldn't feel inadequate in the new process, but you should feel well supported in terms of taking it forward. And increasingly, the answer lies in much greater teamwork among teachers, much greater collaboration across teachers, rather than individual teachers. Teaching has often been often a kind of, despite the fact it's a feminised profession, there being a macho culture inside the profession that it's you in the class. And I think there's an increasing understanding that what we need to do is to see teaching as a highly collaborative profession where teachers learn from each other, work together, reinforce each other, help where anxieties are around, help colleagues to work through those anxieties, because you're part of a team and a community that's working in the best interests of young people. So, of course, there will be anxieties in the reform process. Of course, it looks a bit daunting, but I think if we get it right, it provides an immeasurably better context within which teachers can work, and the job satisfaction of teachers will be much greater than it currently is. In the current reform, I mean, there are issues to do with the complexity of the reform, because we're moving in a number of fronts simultaneously, and a question that's sometimes asked is, are we biting off too much? Could we not just concentrate a bit of this? But I think the message we have from previous attempts at educational reform is that, education doesn't happen in compartments. It's an ecosystem, and if you're going to try to improve one bit of it, you've got to think of the consequences for all the other bits of it. So if you want to change the nature of the curriculum, you've got to think about how you assess that curriculum. You've got to think of whether teachers are capable of engaging with the opportunities offered by the new curriculum. You've got to think about whether or not those who are in leadership positions are creating the context for teachers to be able to do that. And you've got to think about the way in which the accountability mechanisms are potentially having perverse effects. You want them to work to encourage, not discourage, what it is that you're trying to achieve. So we can't escape the complexity of the process. But that means that there's some very in-depth thinking has to be done about the interdependencies that take place and the sequencing that takes place. So that if things go wrong, that's one area where they might have gone wrong, because we get the alignment wrong, and we don't get the interdependencies right. A second area that can go wrong really flows from that is if the reform doesn't address the heart as well as the head of the teaching profession. That if we have a profession and a broader educational community that pays lip service to the reform but doesn't actually engage with it in a way that is because they believe in it, then the risk at the end of the day is you do get old wine in new bottles, and the language changes, but the reality doesn't really change very much in classrooms. So that whole business of ensuring that we have a teaching profession which feels both confident and competent to engage in and take the opportunities the new curriculum will offer for the young people of Wales is another critical thing. And also, in terms of what I've already said, issues around leadership, of those who are in leadership positions, themselves don't create the conditions to allow it to happen, and value maybe different things, then that's a problem. And the accountability system can always be used as an excuse for inactivity. So we have to take that excuse away.
I think teaching is a very challenging career. You know, it's a lot more than, you know, people who are kind of on the outside. You've got to do a lot more than is recognised. You know, people think, oh, it's amazing holidays and, you know, you finish at 3:30, and it's not like that at all. You know, but I think there's a lot of pressure with exams and getting results and targets. And I think the future of teaching has got to, I feel, move away from that slightly. Not overly, because obviously you've got to get children to meet certain standards by certain ages. You know, it's really important. But if we can move away from that slightly and just recognise that there are other things that are equally important, you know, like being creative and, you know, things that aren't necessarily measurable, but will have an impact on the things that are measurable, and just to have some freedom in education to be able to apply that. But I think if that can happen, I think education will, and the future of teaching will be brighter.
The phrase that I use is being well educated is much more than being well qualified. So my vision for all young people, and wherever they are, is that the school should be a place that allows them to grow and develop as individuals, that they acquire all that they need to do in terms of the nature of learning, but they acquire an attitude towards learning that will live with them throughout their lives, that they acquire the ability to discriminate between, in the current context, fact and fiction, the things that have substance and the things that are designed to influence them that may not have much actual substance behind them. So they develop their own values and ethical stances which allow them to engage with very difficult and complex issues, both as individuals and as citizens. And that in the world that they are going to inhabit, and those young people are still going to be alive in the next century, let alone this century. So I think one of the most important things that schools can do is to try to help those young people to go forward into that uncertain future with optimism, with confidence, that they will engage with all that life holds for them in a way that allows them to thrive, not just to cope, but to thrive. So, and schools, good schools do that, and every young person is entitled to a good school.